Alright everyone, so Trump has given us possibly one of his most telling and terrible tweets to date. If you have not seen it yet, it says, quote, "I am a tariff man. When people or countries come in to raid the great wealth of our nation, I want them to pay for the privilege of doing so. It will always be the best way to max out our economic power. We are right now taking in billions of dollars in tariffs. Make America rich again." End quote. Okay, a very fundamental understanding of tariffs makes it rather obvious that this is not completely true. Now, this won't make America rich, but for a short while, it will certainly increase the revenue of the federal government. Unfortunately, that is not you or me. Politicians may end up with more money to play around with and ultimately waste, but your average American will be left poorer, and that is the disingenuous aspect of what Trump says. When he says, "Make America rich again," it will do no such thing. In fact, as I stated before, any increase in revenue the federal government sees, at best, will be short-lived. Because what happens, especially among commodities that may have a highly elastic demand curve? Well, an increase in price could easily lead, or even inevitably lead, to a tumbling of the quantity demanded of that commodity, so the revenue that Trump thinks is going to make America rich again won't even be there for very long. It's very similar to that phenomenon of the Laffer curve. At a certain point, when governments tax at too high of a percentage, their revenue actually goes down because their tax revenue is siphoned off from economic activity. And since taxes hamper economic activity itself, too much taxation kills the very thing it is leeching off of. It's like a parasite that kills its host. The parasite thinks it hit a gold mine until that gold mine collapses, and now you're not getting anything out of it. Now, just as a side note, the Laffer curve is a bit simplistic and there are a few problems with it, but the underlying core principle is sound. I mean, just think logically. If the corporate tax rate, for example, went up to 90%, pretty soon probably 90% of corporations would die off, leaving a small tax base for the government to loot from. And besides, the Laffer curve gives government a way to maximize its revenue from taxation. I'm not too thrilled about that idea, but anyway, I digress. But back to tariffs. I think it would serve Trump very well to read Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. A great part of that book is when Hazlitt addresses tariffs, referring to how tariffs hurt international trade and ultimately hurt the citizens of both nations. It's stated that it is the maxim of every prudent master of a family never to attempt to make at home what it will cost him more to make than to buy. The tailor does not attempt to make his own shoes, but buys them of the shoemaker. The shoemaker does not attempt to make his own clothes, but employs a tailor. The farmer attempts to make neither the one nor the other, but employs those different artificers." End quote. And then Hazlitt keeps going by saying, quote, "It was a whole network of fallacies out of which mankind has still been unable to cut its way, and the chief of them was the central fallacy with which this book is concerned. It was that of considering merely the immediate effects of a tariff on special groups and neglecting to consider its long-run effects on the whole community." End quote. Now, why do I mention this? Because Trump has displayed this fallacy over and over when it comes to tariffs. He claims that tariffs are going to bring back the steel industry in the US, for example. The real big problem here is that he is partially correct. You can put up an impenetrable trade barrier to all steel imports from other countries going into the US, and US steel companies will have a great time because a huge percentage of their competition is no longer in the picture. So as long as there are consumers that are even able to buy products containing a significant amount of steel, US steel companies could very well improve their position. But this is a direct example of the fallacy that Hazlitt points out. It is blatantly looking only to the effects the tariffs have on the steel industry and completely ignoring the effects the tariffs have on the 300 million US citizens. Now, my last point is probably the most important. When this causes an unbelievable amount of pain, people will erroneously attribute their economic pain to free market capitalism. And I can't even place all the blame on them. After all, it is Republicans and Trump And the 66,439 some odd people that liked Trump's tweet that claimed to be all about free markets and limited government. So people may take them at their word, and when economic pain comes, they're going to mistakenly blame the free market, because after all, we supposedly had a free market supporting president at the time that prices skyrocketed. This is a huge problem, because the pain that tariffs cause can be dealt with pretty easily. You get rid of the tariffs, and profit-seeking companies from around the world will be chomping at the bit to sell us lower-priced goods, so you can solve that problem. A problem that is not so easily solved is when you create an entire generation of people who don't realize that their economic pain had nothing to do with free markets. But on the contrary, it was a complete assault on free markets. It was an increase in government involvement that led to their pain. That is a problem that I fear Trump is going to create. Now finally, my last little glimmer of hope in all this is the following. If China says, all right, we're done with this trade war, and they greatly diminish or get rid of their tariffs on U.S. goods, and then Trump does the same, that could be a very positive outcome. China imposing tariffs on the U.S. is bad for both Chinese citizens and U.S. citizens. Both countries imposing tariffs on one another is even worse, but if both countries get rid of their tariffs, that would be fantastic. Even still, I am not a huge fan of political leaders playing Russian roulette with one another, but having the gun pointed at their citizenry instead of themselves. But that's all for now. Please like and subscribe if you didn't hate this. Alright, see ya.